You have probably been taught a great many things about money that sound responsible and still leave people stuck for decades. That is one of the cruelest features of modern financial life. The most damaging ideas are often delivered by people who love you. Parents say them, teachers repeat them, television experts package them in polished language. Friends pass them around at dinner as if they were permanent laws of nature. The tragedy is not only that these ideas are wrong. The tragedy is that they are wrong in a way that feels respectable. That is why they survive. A foolish idea dressed like discipline can live a very long time. I have spent most of my life around capital, businesses, balance sheets, markets, and the strange emotional machinery that human beings attach to money, and if you stay around those things long enough, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Most people do not lose financially because they are lazy. They lose because they are trying very hard inside a system of bad assumptions. They are sincere. They are diligent. They are trying to do what they were told responsible adults do, and yet the result still feels heavy. They earn more and somehow feel little relief. They save, but the future still looks far away. They avoid little pleasures and still do not feel wealthier. They buy what society told them was wise and then discover they bought a burden instead. That is why I want to speak plainly. Not in the language of a salesman, not in the language of a guru, not in the language of the financial entertainment business, where every sentence is built to either flatter your fear or inflate your ambition. I want to speak the way an owner should think calmly, directly, without romance. Because money is not mystical, money is stored choice. Money is reduced fragility. Money is a tool that can either buy freedom or finance a more polished form of dependence. That is the dividing line. And a great many of the common rules people obey keep pushing them toward dependence while making them feel virtuous for the trip. The first lie is that buying a house is automatically the smartest financial decision you can make and renting is somehow money thrown away. This is one of the most emotionally protected lies in the whole culture because it has family memories and moral superiority wrapped around it. Say to an American family that owning a house is not always the best investment. And you are not only challenging a financial assumption, you are challenging identity, you are challenging nostalgia, you are challenging the image of adulthood. Many people have been carrying since they were old enough to understand the word mortgage. People say renting is throwing money away. I have always found that phrase lazy. You know what else can throw money away? Interest, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs you never planned for, capital locked into an asset that grows slower than the alternatives available to you, opportunity cost. The years you spend paying a bank far more than you realize because you never look carefully at how a mortgage actually behaves. People hear the word equity and stop thinking. Equity sounds noble, it sounds permanent, it sounds like evidence of seriousness, and yes, over a long enough period and in the right circumstances, home ownership can absolutely be a good wealth building tool. I am not opposed to buying a house. I am opposed to buying a house blindly. That is a different thing. A house can be a home. A house can also be a large, illiquid, expensive obligation with a sentimental sales pitch attached to it. During the early years of a mortgage, the owner is often paying far more in interest than most people emotionally account for. Meanwhile, the renter may be living in a better area, with lower monthly friction, fewer repair surprises, more flexibility to move, and more investable cash left over each month. That flexibility has value. A person who can relocate for a better job has value. A person whose roof leak becomes somebody else's problem at midnight has value. A person who can invest the spread rather than feed the house constantly may end up wealthier, despite never hearing the phrase building equity from admiring relatives. The great mistake people make is turning home ownership into a moral category instead of a numbers, and life category, that is childish. A house should serve your life. It should not become a religious badge. There are seasons when renting is much smarter. There are seasons when buying is smarter. The adult question is not which option sounds more respectable. The adult question is which option improves your long-term freedom after you have accounted for the full cost. Not just the emotional marketing. Rent is not the maximum waste. And a mortgage is not pure virtue. Rent is a payment for shelter, flexibility, and outsourced maintenance. A mortgage is a blended financial structure with debt service, taxes, repairs, insurance, and time risk built into it. Those are different things. Treat them honestly. The second lie is that the road to financial control runs through tracking every tiny expense like a sleep-deprived accountant. This advice has always amused me because it flatters the wrong kind of effort. People spend hours categorizing snacks, coffee, parking, and random transactions as if the path to wealth were hidden inside the price of a sandwich. That is not where the big money is won or lost. Now, I am not against clarity. I like clarity. I like knowing what comes in and what goes out. I like seeing the structure of a household the way I like seeing the structure of a business. But clarity is not the same as obsessive logging. The people who do very well with money are rarely the people who sit in a state of endless surveillance over every dollar. The people who do well build a system. They decide what percentage goes to fixed costs, what percentage goes to investing, what percentage goes to reserves, and what percentage is available for enjoyment. Then they automate the system and get on with life. That is adult finance, not nightly penance over whether the family spent too much on berries. The truth is that most financial pain comes from the big levers: housing too high, cars too expensive, debt too easy, investment rates too low, fees too high, income too stagnant because skill growth stopped. Those are the places that determine whether a life is getting stronger or weaker. A person can track every coffee for 6 years and still be crushed by an oversized mortgage and a foolish car payment. That is why I have little respect for penny theater. The world is full of people asking $3 questions and ignoring 30,000 dollar questions. Should I skip this coffee? That is the kind of question that makes people feel disciplined without making them substantially stronger. A better question is whether your fixed costs have swallowed too much of your future. A better question is whether your savings and investing happen automatically before your emotions get a vote. A better question is whether you have built a structure strong enough that you can spend on small pleasures without guilt, because the important categories were already handled. That is what a conscious spending system does. It allows the future to be funded and the present to be enjoyed without constant moral friction. The people who become quietly wealthy usually live inside systems, not spreadsheets full of self-reproach. The third lie is one of the oldest and laziest in public financial advice. If you just cut out small pleasures, you will become rich. Coffee is always the favorite example because it is easy to shame and small enough to dramatize. I have always thought this advice revealed more about the speaker than about the subject. It usually comes from someone who wants an easy villain. If a young person feels squeezed, it must be avocado toast. If a family is behind, it must be coffee and lunch. If a generation struggles with high housing costs, healthcare strain, wage stagnation, and structurally rising fixed expenses, the answer, supposedly, is a latte lecture. That is nonsense. A $5 daily habit is not ideal if a household is drowning. Of course not. But the larger point is that tiny cuts rarely transform a life by themselves. A better salary can, a better skill can, a better fixed cost structure can, a cheaper car can, a lower fee load over decades can, a smart refinance at the right time can, a choice to live slightly below your means for several years can. The obsession with tiny pleasures is so dangerous because it trains people to attack the wrong target. They become guilty without becoming stronger. That is the worst combination. I do not want people walking around ashamed every time they buy something they genuinely enjoy. I want them to eliminate spending that does not matter so they can spend freely on what does. That is a much better philosophy. If you love good coffee, buy the coffee. If you love eating out a few times a month and your structure supports it, enjoy it. If you love travel, clothes, concerts, or gifts, build the system, so those things can happen without vandalizing the future. Money should reduce guilt, not create a religion around deprivation. The real financial offenders are usually not the little joys. They are the unconscious habits and the oversized structural decisions, the $900 car payment, the too large apartment, the subscription pile that multiplies, because nobody bothered to look. The lifestyle upgrades that arrive with every raise and quietly steal what could have become freedom, that is where the serious money goes. I would rather see a person drive a modest car, invest aggressively, and enjoy dinner out every week than drive a status symbol, invest almost nothing, and spend his life feeling morally superior for skipping appetizers. That is not even close. One strategy builds freedom, the other builds performance art. The fourth lie is that credit cards are inherently evil and should be avoided, as though the plastic itself carries moral contamination. This is one of those pieces of advice that sounds simple enough to be useful and is therefore repeated endlessly. The problem is that reality is more complicated. Credit cards are a tool. Like most tools, they are dangerous in the hands of the careless and useful, in the hands of the disciplined. If a person carries high-interest credit card debt month after month, that is destructive. It is one of the ugliest forms of consumer finance because the rates are punitive and the mathematics are merciless. If you are in that position, the answer is not sophisticated. Pay it off aggressively. Do not flatter yourself. Do not call it strategy. Get rid of it. That part is easy, but once the debt is eliminated, the conversation changes. A credit card paid in full every month is not the same thing as debt. In the practical sense people mean, it is an operating instrument. It can build credit history. It can provide fraud protection. It can offer cashback, travel rewards, warranty extensions, purchase protection, and smoother transaction records. None of those benefits matter if the cardholder cannot control behavior. All of them matter if he can. The problem with black and white rules is that they often prevent adults from becoming stronger. Avoid credit cards forever is the financial version of saying never ride a bike because someone once fell. Learn the right way to use the thing. Build the structure, set autopay. Never carry a balance. Treat the card like a payment rail, not a permission slip. Then the tool begins serving you instead of the company that issued it. That is the right relationship. I have no interest in making people afraid of ordinary financial tools. I want them capable. Capable is better than sheltered. Sheltered people eventually meet the world unprepared. The fifth lie is that investing is mainly about finding the next hot stock. This one will probably never die because it appeals to one of the oldest fantasies in human behavior, the fantasy of the shortcut, the fantasy that one great pick will solve what discipline has not yet solved. A cousin bought crypto early. A friend made a killing in one tech stock. A coworker says the market is easy if you know the right names. And suddenly the mind begins hating the slow path. That is where ordinary wealth building gets sabotaged. I have made my views on this clear for years. For most people, the winning investment strategy is not constant prediction. It is boring consistency, a diversified, low-cost, long-term approach carried out automatically and without emotional theater will beat the great majority of attempts to sound clever. That is not because cleverness never works. It is because cleverness is hard to sustain, hard to size, hard to repeat, and usually contaminated by ego. Most people do not need an exciting portfolio. They need one they can survive. That is a very different standard. The great tragedy in investing is not only choosing the wrong stock. It is not staying in the market long enough or compounding to do the heavy lifting. People buy, sell, panic, wait for a better entry, miss rebounds, chase stories, change strategies every few months, and then wonder why the long-term returns they read about never seem to arrive in their own accounts. The answer is simple. The returns belong to the patient owner, not the restless spectator. Time in the market matters far more than the average person emotionally accepts. The best days and the worst days often arrive near each other. People who jump out during fear have a way of missing the recovery that repairs the entire picture. That is why I like automation. It removes drama from the process. It lets an ordinary person behave sensibly even when the headlines are loud. A low-cost index fund is not there to entertain you. It is there to convert the productivity of the business world into a growing claim on your future. That is enough. More than enough. A person who steadily buys broad productive ownership over decades is doing something powerful, even if it does not look glamorous at a cocktail party. The sixth lie is that nearly everyone needs a financial advisor charging a percentage of assets just to avoid disaster. I have always disliked this arrangement. Not because advice is worthless, advice can be valuable, not because there are no good advisors. There are some very good ones. The problem is the fee structure and the false mystique built around ordinary investing. If a person has a straightforward financial life, steady income, retirement accounts, a reasonable spending system, and a long-term investing approach centered on low-cost funds, then paying 1% of assets every year to have someone nod gravely and rebalance a simple portfolio is often an outrageous leakage of wealth. 1% sounds small because people are bad at feeling percentages over decades. It is not small. It is huge. It is not merely the fee itself. It is the fee plus the loss compounding on the fee that left every year. That is how modest seeming drags become six-figure and seven-figure transfers away from your future. Now, there are cases where good advice matters immensely: complex estate planning, blended families, business sales, unusual tax complexity, large charitable structures, intergenerational planning. These are real issues. A thoughtful advisor, accountant, or attorney can be well worth paying in such circumstances, but most people do not need mystery. They need a sensible system. Employer match first tax-advantaged accounts where appropriate low-cost broad funds, automated contributions, clear insurance, emergency reserves, reasonable spending. That is not advanced. That is enough. If a person wants help implementing a system, I understand that. But I will never admire the habit of paying a permanent percentage of a lifetime's savings for someone to make the simple look complicated. That is an expensive way to rent confidence. I prefer owning understanding. The seventh lie may be the most seductive of all because it disguises itself as noble aspiration. Follow your passion and the money will come. This is one of those sentences that sounds beautiful until it starts wrecking lives. Passion is a fine thing. I like passion. I have lived with passion for reading, business, investing, and learning for most of my life. But passion is not a plan, and it is certainly not an income model by itself. Most people do not become passionate first and profitable second. Very often it works the other way around. They become competent, then useful, then valuable, then paid. Then the work begins feeling interesting because mastery and reward have started reinforcing each other. That is how life really works for a great many people. A person can say he loves photography. That is nice. Will he love client management, pricing, negotiation, editing at midnight, marketing contracts, tax records, and rejection? A person can say she loves baking. Wonderful. Will she love the economics, the inventory, the hours, the physical strain, the packaging, the customer complaints, the margin pressure, and the reality of turning a skill into a commercial operation? This is where adult thinking matters. You do not build a rich life by waiting for lightning to strike your identity. You build it by developing skills that the market values and then using the resulting income to create options. Passion often follows competence much more reliably than competence follows passion. That is not cynical. That is liberating. It means you do not have to wait for the universe to reveal your true calling before becoming financially strong. You can ask a much better question: what am I good at? What could I get better at? What do people actually pay for? What problems can I solve better than I solve them today? That is the right path. A person who becomes excellent at something useful can then use the money and flexibility that competence creates to explore deeper passions without desperation hanging over the whole experience. Freedom is a much better incubator for creativity than financial panic. That is why I prefer skill first, fantasy second. Once you see these 7 lies clearly, a pattern emerges. Each lie pulls attention away from the true drivers of a strong financial life. The house lie turns a major capital allocation decision into a social duty. The budgeting lie turns money into endless tiny guilt. Instead of system design, the coffee lie distracts from the big levers. The credit card lie teaches avoidance instead of capability. The hot stock lie replaces patience with excitement. The advisor lie tells people to rent clarity instead of building it. The passion lie confuses inspiration with economic usefulness. What replaces these lies is not one magic answer. It is a more mature framework. Buy housing when the numbers in your life support it. Not because of pressure, automate your finances instead of counting berries. Spend consciously on what you love after your core categories are funded. Use credit carefully and never carry the balance. Invest consistently in low-cost, diversified assets and let time do the heavy work. Pay for expert advice when complexity justifies it, but do not hand over a lifetime percentage for simple problems. Develop skills that create income and optionality, and let passion grow out of competence and freedom. That framework is not flashy. Good flashy is overrated. The people who become strong with money are often not the loudest or the most performative. They are the people who quietly stop obeying bad rules. They ask better questions. They stop chasing moral approval through financial behavior and start asking whether the behavior actually improves the life. That is what I want. Not a life that looks disciplined from the outside while remaining anxious underneath. A life that is structurally strong. A life where the fixed costs are reasonable. The investments happen automatically. The pleasures are enjoyed without guilt because the foundations are already in place. The debt is controlled, the future is being funded, the present is being lived, and the whole thing works without daily drama. That is a rich life. Not because every person wants the same luxuries, because every sane person wants more choice, less stress, and more control over time. That is what money should buy. Not shame, not status theater, not constant moral tension. If you have been following the wrong rules for years, that does not make you foolish. It makes you normal. But normal is not a standard I admire when it comes to money. Normal is broke households with nice cars. Normal is overspending on the big categories and obsessing over coffee. Normal is waiting too long to invest. Normal is treating a house like an identity statement. Normal is renting confidence from advisors while avoiding the simple truths that would actually build freedom. Normal is expensive. I want something better than normal. I want adults who know the difference between a good story and a good system. A good story sounds wise at Thanksgiving. A good system quietly makes life better over 20 years. Choose the system, choose it again next month. Choose it when the world tries to embarrass you into bigger spending. Choose it when your friends act as if urgency and noise are evidence of intelligence. Choose it when the internet tells you a shortcut exists. Choose it when boredom makes discipline feel less glamorous than speculation. That is how wealth is built. Not through one righteous purchase. Not through one perfect budget. Not through one winning stock. Not through one viral insight about abundance. Through repeated alignment between what your money does today and what your future needs tomorrow. That is the whole thing. Simple enough to sound unremarkable, powerful enough to change a life if you finally stop believing the wrong people. And the beautiful part is that once you stop obeying these 7 lies, money often gets much calmer. You stop feeling that every purchase is a moral trial. You stop feeling that every month requires a fresh burst of heroic discipline. You stop feeling that you are one secret away from understanding. You realize that most financial peace is not hidden. It is built from a few strong principles, repeated with more consistency than drama. That is a very good trade. I have always preferred trades like that. The world keeps trying to sell people complexity, guilt, and urgency. I would rather own simplicity, capability, and time. Those things compound much better. That is where I would put my money. That is where I did put it. And that is still the direction I would point anyone who wants a life that feels richer, not only on paper, but in the daily experience of being alive.